Thanks for tuning in to the Diaphragm Dynasty. I'm back with another topic, a controversial topic that's pretty much been around for the last probably 10 years or so when in relations to R&B specifically, of course, as we always do here at the Diaphragm Dynasty. The topic of is R&B dying as we know it? Now, we know about the golden years of R&B. If you want to go all the way back to the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and especially the 90s, even the early 2000s. But lately, there has been a trend of R&B music, not on the forefront as much, taking a back seat to even hip hop and other genres. So there's been a lot of talk, or even amongst the purists and people that listen to music, especially if you grew up in an era other than this era, you feel like there's been a decline in the R&B music. Now, the genre has a storied history with amazing artists going all the way back to Marvin Gaye and Motown and Stevie Wonder and all of these different great artists, Prince, even back in the day. But we don't have many superstars in the R&B game like we did. And the superstars that we do have, either are working on other ventures and too rich to do it anymore. Either they passed away or they're incarcerated or they've taken some kind of crazy hiatus. So there's a lot of different variables right now for why the most people see a decline in the R&B music genre. So I'll get into a few of them that I think that might be the culprit because there's not obviously one reason for why the decline of the music and then not just decline with the music, but the superstar in R&B as well. There's a lot of different reasons, and follow along with me if you believe, or if you think there's some merit to some of these reasons. Um, I think one of the reasons is that there are no more old school groups. So you don't have the TLCs, the Destiny's Childs, the 112s, the Drew Hills, the Jodeci's anymore. Those groups are gone. And another reason for those groups not being around is because it's not seen as lucrative anymore. Because even the groups back in the days, the most common fuss was the money or the financial aspect of being a group. The financial aspect of being in a group, you got to split the pie three, four ways, at the best, two ways, but usually it's about four or five members. Like if you had a Drew Hill who had a pretty decent sized group, you're splitting the pie a lot of ways. And we all know that the money in music has declined, especially in relatability to the economy and what things cost now and the cost of living and things like that. So if you have to split that so many ways and you're only getting a small portion, most people will say, it's not worth it to get in those groups. But those groups used to be legendary because you had so many different voices, so many different aspects. Um, it was like picking your favorite player on the team. Everybody had a favorite. Most of the time, the lead would be the guy, but nevertheless, we don't have those groups as much as we used to have. Everyone who was solo used to start off in a group most of the time, but nowadays they're just starting off solo, don't have a lot of backing, maybe independent or with, just trying to get much money as they can. So that's one of the culprits for this. And another reason why we don't have groups in R&B anymore because of the socialization process that exists today. We know that most kids don't even meet in person anymore. They're FaceTiming, they're on Zoom, they're on whatever social media app that you use. That they don't really talk face to face anymore. There are no face to face meets. So the socialization process is pretty much non-existent anymore. So there's not really a group to put together. If you have friends that you never met before, you have friends that you only see on occasion. People don't even like to call each other anymore. They just want to text everyone. But it messes up the socialization process. So those groups won't exist anyway, just from the sheer time that we live in. Um, but another thing that, other than music not being lucrative and there are no more groups anymore, um, I think the Dream blamed the incorporation of hip hop music into the genre. And I know it caused a rift between him and like Chris Brown back then. But there was some truth to what the Dream was talking about. Most of the groups now, I mean, not groups now, but most of the artists, the R&B artists now are tied to some kind of hip hop group or hip hop conglomerate or some kind of hip hop label. When you think about a SZA who's tied to a TDE, when you think about artists like, even Beyonce, her husband is over at Rock Nation. She usually has some kind of hip hop twist in her music. She's ventured off the country now, so she's not even pure hip hop. I mean, R&B, solely into R&B right now. Even though it's rumored that her next album might be R&B, which we are all clamoring for and we need. Artists like a Rihanna, who's tied to Rock Nation as well, and her husband is ASAP Rocky, who's a rapper. In addition to that, so every R&B artist now are tied to some kind of hip hop legends. So it only makes sense for hip hop to be incorporated into the music, and even the beats now in R&B albums are pretty much hip hop beats, and they're going to hip hop producers. So the incorporation of hip hop into the genre, I don't think is a reason for the deterioration, but I think it kind of veers people away from the pure roots of what R&B is supposed to be about love and about passion and about changing the world and things like that. But when you go off to, different aspects of hip hop, then it takes away from the purity of the genre, which ultimately can alter the art. So that's one of the true perspectives that I believe is the cause for the alteration or the deterioration of the genre in itself. And Jermaine Dupri blamed the lack of artists who originated from the church as a reason for a decline in the music right now, which it has some can have some merit to it because some of your bigger artists like Whitney Houston, um, other artists like that, they grew up in the church. Monica, I believe Brandy grew up in the church as well, which, most of those Southern artists or artists in those rural towns grew up in churches. So that makes sense when you think about all of the huge stars that came from the church, even Beyonce, Destiny's Child in general came from the church. So but artists today don't necessarily come from that background, so the singing is a lot different. The passion's a lot different because, of course, when you're doing it in the church, it's for free or not that much money. So then you have a different respect for the art. I think is what he was trying to get to, but he caught a lot of slack for that. But I think that it was some merit to what he had to say about it. And then one of the last reasons for, I think, the decline of the music and the marketing is a factor as well because a lot of these artists now don't market themselves or promote themselves as much because they have this thing about exclusivity. I'm only going to speak to certain media outlets. I'm only going to pop out when it's time to promote something, and you don't really get a part of their lives, which they're not entitled to give us a part of their lives. But then that creates a different love for the artist and creates that relatability. When you're so elusive, people feel like sometimes that you're better than and that you're beneath doing the typical methods to get the stardom and to get the acclaim. And we know these artists that we don't know much about, your Frank Oceans, your Beyonce's, your Rihanna's, even SZA. These artists only pop out every so often, especially Frank Ocean. He's one of the most influential R&B artists that we have, but he doesn't, make the music as much. And I always talk about this trend of these artists, do all of these great things and overcome these great obstacles, become artists, and then once they get the music, they take it for granted and kind of disappear and don't really follow through. And it's a shame to see. If you work so hard for something, you would think that you would want to maintain it and be, and loving of it. But there's not a lot of that anymore. Once they get the fame and the acclaim and the money, they kind of back off into the light. But they got to remember what got them there and the love that they had leading up to it. Unless it was just about the money, then that's a different story. But for the artistry, you definitely have to remain humble and continue to make great work and be consistent, which we haven't seen a lot in the genre lately. So, but you know, I think those are good reasons for the decline in the music. But tell me what you think. Until next time, I'll see you next time.